Hello, and welcome. Take a deep breath, allow the tension in your shoulders to soften, and ease into a comfortable position, perhaps even recline if you like. Tonight, we're going to drift backward through time, gently and unhurriedly, into the folds of medieval life. But rather than battles or kings or revolutions, we're going to explore something far quieter, something deeply ordinary, and yet, it may surprise you. We're going to talk about how people once slept, not how they dreamed, or how often they rested. No, we'll explore how they physically lay quite literally, how their bodies were positioned during slumber, and in particular, we'll unravel the mystery of why so many people in the 1300s, across Europe and beyond, chose to sleep, sitting up. It's an image that might seem strange to our modern minds, so accustomed to sprawling mattresses and the inviting embrace of horizontal rest. But for many in the Middle Ages, the night's rest did not mean lying completely flat. Instead, it meant sitting upright in bed, propped by cushions or boards, in a pose that appears, at first glance, more suited to wakefulness than to sleep. Over the course of this quiet journey, we'll examine the daily life of medieval people, the medical theories that shaped their beliefs, and the cultural habits that informed their routines. We'll step softly through sleeping chambers, linger near low-burning hearths, and listen for the soft rustle of linen as night descends. Let's begin where all good stories of the Middle Ages begin, not in the throne rooms of kings, but in the homes of everyday people. Imagine yourself in a modest home in 14th century England. The timber frame creaks faintly in the cool night air. The thatched roof above you dense with dried reeds and small, darting noises, perhaps a mouse or a nesting bird. The room you're in is dim, lit only by the dull red glow of the embers in the hearth. The scent of the day lingers in the ira, faint trace of bread, the sharper tang of smoke, the soft mustiness of woolen cloth and straw. In this space, simple yet functional, you might find the family bed, or perhaps, depending on your status, a rope-strung mattress laid over a wooden frame, covered in linen sheets, coarse but freshly laundered. It's late now. The sun has long since sunk below the horizon, but unlike our own tightly segmented nights of sleep, medieval evenings unfolded in phases. The first sleep, they called it the initial stretch of slumber that might begin just after dusk. This would be followed by a period of wakefulness, quiet hours in the middle of the night used for prayer, reflection, or even chores before returning to bed for the second sleep. And when sleep came, it often did so not in the modern posture of complete recumbence, but in a more upright position. People would rest sitting up in bed, supported by a series of bolsters and pillows, or even built-in headboards slanted just so. This wasn't always due to discomfort. In fact, the upright posture was often quite deliberate, considered not only practical, but even preferable. In homes where multiple family members might sleep in one bed, sitting up helped create a sense of shared space that remained respectful. It allowed for easier conversation, for nighttime nursing of infants, or even the reading of scripture aloud. Privacy, as we understand it today, was a rare luxury in the 1300s. Beds were often shared, and rooms served multiple functions. To sit upright in bed was to maintain a degree of dignity, to remain, in some subtle way, prepared. It's worth remembering too that beds weren't only for sleeping. They were often the warmest place in the house. People might eat there, tend to wounds, or listen to stories. In fact, the bed was a central feature of Leafer personal corner, in a world that afforded little personal space. And so, the posture of sleep was shaped by both necessity and culture. With chimneys rare, hearths glowed low through the night, and smoke gathered near the roof. To sleep flat on the floor might mean breathing in cold, damp air or worse, the lingering smoke of the fire. An elevated head allowed for easier breathing and better warmth. And so, the body reclined, but never fully. Legs stretched, but heads remained upright. The back curved gently against the pillows, and the arms folded softly across the lap or chest. This imager room, quiet but alive with the textures of medieval life, a family resting upright beneath heavy woolen covers, reminds us that history isn't just made in grand moments. It resides in the small, enduring habits of people just like us. People who found comfort where they could, and who just like you tonight sought rest after long days. And as we settle into that image, let's move a little deeper. Let's look at who shaped these customs, and why. As we gently leave the glowing hearths and modest chambers of everyday folk, Let us now venture into the quieter corridors of thought, into the parchment-lined studies of physicians, monks, and scholars who offered guidance on how and why the body should rest in certain ways. In the 1300s, medicine was still deeply entwined with classical thought, particularly the works of Galen and Hippocrates, ancient scholars whose theories held sway for over a millennium. Central among these ideas was the humoral theory, the belief that the body was governed by four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a matter of balance among them, and illness, a sign that one humor had become dominant. The very act of sleeping, then, was not merely a passive retreat but a physiological process to be managed carefully. How you lay your body down could determine how well your humors settled, how effectively digestion occurred, and whether vapors rose properly from the stomach to the head. And so, medieval texts on health and wellness often recommended a semi-reclined or upright position for sleep, especially after eating. It was thought that lying flat might hinder digestion, allowing food to stagnate in the belly, souring the breath and corrupting the humors. Instead, elevating the head and torso would allow for a gentle downward path of digestion and inward trickle, rather than a stagnant pool. Medical guides from the time, even those adapted for lay readers, often contained charts and diagrams instructing how to lie, on which side to favor, the right initially for warmth, then turning to the left to encourage digestion, and how to prop oneself for optimum health. Consider the Taquinum Sanitatis, a medieval handbook on wellness derived from earlier Arabic texts. In beautifully illuminated pages, it offers advice not only on herbs and foods, but also on posture, mood, sleep, and rest. One could find recommendations for elevating the head during sleep to avoid the gathering of bad humors or the intrusion of melancholic vapors. Sleep, it warned, should not be too deep, too long, or too flat. The upright sleeping posture also had spiritual connotations. The Christian worldview of the 14th century was ever present in all aspects of life, including the body's repose. To lie completely flat was sometimes associated with death, a full surrender, akin to the laying out of a corpse. Sitting upright, by contrast, symbolized readiness, humility, and vigilance. One was not entirely at rest, but in a state of peaceful alertness. Monastic orders, in particular, often prescribed upright sleeping postures. In some monasteries, monks slept in a seated position against their stalls, arms folded, clothed in their habits. The idea was to avoid indulgence, to remain disciplined even in slumber. Sleep, after all, was necessary but not to be savoured. For the more affluent, medical recommendations translated into custom-made beds. Headboards slanted gently, cushions were placed in graduated stacks, and bed frames were designed to support a seated pose. The wealthiest might have specialized bolsters embroidered and stuffed with feathers that allowed for comfort within medical bounds. And while the language of humors and vapors may feel strange to us today, it served a very real purpose for people then. It gave structure and understanding to the sensations of the body. It offered a sense of control in a world where illness was frequent and cures uncertain. To sleep upright was to do one's part in preserving health. It was a subtle act of self-care, performed each night with ritual consistency, and for those who followed the guidance of physicians or clerics, it was also a sign of obedience and wisdom. Now, having traced the roots of upright sleep through the lens of medieval medicine, let us explore another dimension, one less visible, but no less fascinating: the mysterious findings of archaeology and what the sleeping spaces of the past can tell us. As we now walk more quietly still, through the damp hush of ruined castles and silent abbey walls, we find ourselves in the company of archaeologists, those modern historians who do not read history solely from books, but from soil and timber, from fragments of pottery and the grain of ancient wood. Surprisingly, much of what we know about how people slept in the 1300s comes not from direct evidence, but from what remains around the margins of daily life. After all, sleep does not fossilize, and yet the spaces that surrounded sleeped platforms, bedding materials, even the placement of hearths offer us subtle but revealing clues. Excavations of medieval homes, particularly in northern and western Europe, have uncovered bed frames shaped with a backward slope, sometimes with carved headboards, or remaining anchor points for bolsters and pillows. These pieces, though often decayed, suggest a preference for elevation at the head, rather than a purely horizontal design. Wooden frameworks were sometimes set at a tilt, a quiet architectural whisper in favor of upright rest. In wealthier homes, stone hearths are frequently found quite close to bed alcoves, and sometimes within the sleeping area itself. The proximity to fire, it seems, was not only for warmth, but possibly also for smoke control. A tilted posture during sleep may have allowed the sleeper to avoid the low-lying smoke that pooled along the floor during colder months. In such homes, narrow chimney, flues often inefficient by modern standards, would allow some smoke to rise, but much remained lingering, especially in the hours before dawn. Then there are the sleeping niches discovered in some stone buildings, carved recesses in thick walls that likely held small beds or pallets. These spaces, protected and private, were often barely long enough for a person to lie flat, yet they were tall enough to allow someone to rest in a seated or reclined posture. The architectural suggestion again leans toward upright sleep. Among burial sites, too, we occasionally find echoes of these habits, not in the dead, but in the grave goods or depictions left behind. Though medieval Christian burials typically laid the body flat, effigies atop tombs sometimes depict the deceased in reclined, semi-seated position, hands folded over the chest, head gently propped on an embroidered pillow. These were idealized portraits, and their posture may have reflected not death alone, but also the person's favored way of sleeping in life. One curious finding comes from preserved manorial records and inventory lists. Among the items most often valued and bequeathed in wills were beads with bolsters, and specific mention is sometimes made of breastboards, likely wooden supports or panels that aided in maintaining an upright posture. That such features were listed among a household's prized possessions suggests their importance, both practical and cultural. And then there are the texts discovered in monastic libraries or castle archives, annotations scribbled into the margins of psalters or books of hours, perhaps in the slow, reflective time between first and second sleep. Some of these notes mention comfort or complaint or prayers before resting, small indicators that the sleeping experience itself was something consciously shaped and observed. Though there remains a modest and angled bedpost here, a tilted hearth, there they speak with gentle clarity. The medieval home was built not just to shelter sleep, but to shape it. The spaces where people rested were carved with intention, adjusted over time, and passed down from one generation to the next. And the semi-seated sleeper, resting upright in the shadowed quiet of night, was not an anomaly but part of a broader pattern, one inscribed into the very architecture of the world they knew. From here, with a clearer sense of material life and custom, we turn next to consider how this experience varied across society, how the upright sleeper differed between rich and poor, noble and labourer, and what sleep meant at the edges of privilege. Now, let us slip gently from the humble cottages and low-timbered homes of the countryside into the high-ceilinged chambers of manor houses and castles. Here, in rooms filled with tapestries and lit by flickering candlelight, sleep took on different textures. The posture may have been similar, but the reasons, comforts, and meanings diverged, shaped, as so much else was in the 1300s, by status. For the peasant and field labourer, the end of the day came with exhaustion. After hours spent tending crops, mending tools, or fetching water, sleep was essential and immediate. Their beds, if they had them, were simple. A wooden platform strung with ropes or leather strips might support a sack of straw or reeds, covered in coarse linen or wool. Often, entire families shared a single bed or slept in the same room, and space was managed carefully, bodies curled, legs intertwined, and heads often propped up on folded cloaks or homemade bolsters. The upright posture in these settings was partly necessity. A sloped pillow, a tucked-up blanket, or a bundled tunic beneath the back served to elevate the head, not always by preference, but to make do with what was available. Sharing a bed encouraged mutual respect, and sleeping partly upright allowed for boundaries in tight quarters. In contrast, the wealthy were able to transform sleep into something ornate, almost ceremonial. A noble's bed was a substantial piece of furniture, often ornately carved and draped with layers of fabric, embroidered canopies, linen sheets, heavy woolen blankets, and, most importantly, pillows in various shapes and sizes. Among the upper classes, the upright sleeping posture was often reinforced by deliberate design. Beds featured angled headboards and multiple layers of bolstering. One pillow supported the head, another the back, and smaller ones might be placed beneath the knees or arms. The effect was a sort of throne of sleep, comforting, upright, and always ready to receive visitors or attendants. Indeed, sleep for the elite was rarely private. Servants moved quietly through chambers even in the night, tending fires or fetching water. A seated or propped position allowed a noble to awaken, speak, or even sit and receive news without rising from bed. Diaries and records suggest that members of the aristocracy often held discussions, managed affairs, or dictated letters while resting in this manner. And yet, despite the luxury, the elite shared many of the same beliefs about the risks of lying flat. Doctors to the noble households echoed the warnings of humoral imbalance. Upright sleep was not only fashionable but also seen as sensible. It protected against illness, discouraged the build-up of bad air, and allowed for more regular nighttime prayer. Religious devotion, in fact, often mingled with the customs of sleep. The wealthy frequently owned personal books of hour slavishly illustrated volumes that guided the devout through prayers to be said at specific times of day and night. These books were often kept close to the bed, and upright posture enabled reading or murmuring prayers in the still darkness between first and second sleep. Social distinctions were evident even in the materials of rest. While the poor made do with straw-stuffed mattresses and homespun sheets, the elite indulged in feather beds and down pillows, perfumed with lavender or rose petals. Their bed curtains were drawn shut to hold warmth and preserve privacy. And yet, despite these differences, the upright posture remained common to both classes, a shared gesture, shaped by belief, practicality, and the enduring logic of the time. What these differences reveal is not just how sleep was shaped by wealth, but how the very experience of the night was curated. The poor found their rest where they could, adapting to space and survival. The rich turned sleep into ritual, buffered by comfort, and attended by care. Still, all closed their eyes eventually under the same sky, and the soft elevation of the head, the cradling of the back, these quiet acts of nightly preparation bound them together in an unspoken tradition. As we continue, we now turn to a more curious chapter in this story, the role of superstition and fear in shaping how people chose to sleep, and why the upright position was sometimes thought to offer protection against unseen forces. The world of the 1300s was not only lit by fire and governed by custom, it was also thick with belief. As night fell, so too did the veil between the known and the unknown. Shadows stretched long across floorboards, and sounds in the dark seemed to echo from places unseen. And in this atmosphere of mystery, posture during sleep, particularly the choice to rest, sitting up, took on yet another layer of meaning. To the medieval mind, the night was not just a time of rest, it was also a time of vulnerability. Sleep left the body still, passive, and so some believed open to interference from spiritual forces. Across Europe, stories circulated of night spirits, witches, and demons who crept into homes to visit sleepers. The most famous of these was the mare, a spectral being said to sit upon the chest of the sleeping, causing nightmares and paralysis. From this legend comes the very word nightmare. To guard against such unwelcome visitors, posture became a kind of quiet defense. Sleeping upright was seen, by some, as a warding postulus exposed, less open to the oppressive weight of spirits said to alight upon flat-chested sleepers. In folk tradition, the fully reclined body was almost funereal in form. To sleep with arms folded and spine flat upon the bed was to invite something unspokener, mimicry of the grave. Instead, the upright sleeper maintained a posture of readiness, not alertness exactly, but a gentle resistance against spiritual intrusion. Pillows propped the body like a watchful figure. Some even believed that to sleep too deeply was dangerous not just to health, but to the soul itself, which might wander too far and risk not returning. Tales of changelings and soul theft murmured along the edges of villages. In parts of rural Europe, it was said that demons or fairies might steal into homes and exchange a living person for a spirit double while they slept. Upright posture, it was thought, made such exchanges less likely. A seated form was closer to walking a body not yet surrendered. Amulets and charms often accompanied sleep. In some households, small crosses were hung above beds. In others, iron tools such as keys or knives were laid near the sleeping area, not for use, but as talismans to repel malevolent forces. Holy water was sometimes sprinkled at the foot of the bed, and prayers were whispered into the night air before the eyes were closed. And yet, Even amid these fears, sleep retained its gentler meanings. The upright posture was also seen as a way to maintain grace and composure, even in unconsciousness. For the devout, the nighttime was filled with opportunity moments of quiet for introspection, for soft prayers murmured in half-dreams. To sleep upright was to remain, in some way, spiritually aware. In monasteries, this belief was particularly strong. Some orders forbade monks from lying flat, requiring that they rest sitting, or on benches, cloaked and hooded, their bodies bowed but never prone. This discipline was not only for modesty, but for spiritual vigilance. It was thought that the devil took particular delight in tempting the idle or the deeply asleep. And so, across regions and classes, sleep became something more than rest. It became a guarded passage through darkness, a crossing managed carefully through posture, prayer, and presence. To sit while sleeping was to remain gently tethered to the waking world, to stave off not only illness but intrusion. It was a quiet, resistancean, unconscious ritual practiced every night, in homes both grand and humble. Let us now explore another facet of this custom. We've spoken of homes, fears, and social norms, but what of the materials themselves? In our next segment, we turn to the physical reality of beds, linens, and the humble tools that shaped the sleeping experience in the 1300s. Now, let us open the shutters just a little, letting the cool breeze of detail stir through the still air of the sleeping chamber. For in order to truly understand the upright sleep of the 1300s, we must consider the physical environment, the tools and textures that shaped the act of rest itself. Imagine the bed, not as the modern, spring-loaded rectangle we know today, but as a frame built of wood pine, elm, or oak, its joints pegged by hand, its ropes woven taut like the strings of a harp. The mattress laid upon it was often a large sack stuffed with straw, reeds, or in wealthier homes, down or feathers. It would be shaken and plumped each evening, an act of both routine and preparation. But sleeping upright demanded more than a flat surface. It required structure. Propped behind the sleeper was often a large bolster and elongated cushion filled with straw or wool, and designed to support the back and shoulders. Smaller pillows might be stacked above it, raising the head in careful gradations. In noble households, these pillows were not merely functional, but decorative as well. Embroidered with thread, adorned with tassels, and sometimes scented with lavender, dried rose petals, or rosemary, they offered not only elevation but a touch of sensory comfort. Some even bore stitched prayers, or household crests, gentle reminders of status and sanctity. The bedframe itself often played a part in posture. In the homes of the elite, headboards were not vertical, but sloped back at an angle, encouraging a natural recline rather than a full lie-down. Some even featured carved ledges or shelves behind the sleeper's head, ideal for resting a candle holder or a small book of prayers. Curtains hung from wooden poles or canopy frames, drawn shut at night, not just for warmth, but for modesty and a sense of enclosure. The materials varied: linen for the practical, wool for the warm, velvet or damask for the wealthy. When drawn, they held in body heat and muffled sound, transforming the bed into a cocoon, intimate and protective. As for nightwear, most people slept in the garments they wore during the day, or perhaps in a light shift or tunic. The notion of dedicated pajamas would not emerge for centuries. Linen shifts were common, soft and breathable, though rarely laundered as frequently as we might expect today. The well-to-do might wear caps to bed-white linen coverings that kept hair neat and added warmth. These nightcaps, depicted in countless later illustrations, were a quiet feature of the upright sleeper's silhouette. Woolen stockings might be worn to bed in the coldest months, along with cloaks or extra blankets layered high. In some households, hot stones wrapped in cloth were placed near the feet or under the mattress to warm the bed before rest. In others, pets, particularly small dogs, were welcomed into bed as living hot water bottles, offering warmth and companionship through the long nights. Lighting too played a role. A small oil lamp or rushlight might burn low on a wooden stand beside the bed, but in most homes, light faded early. Firelight from the hearth was the primary source of glow, and once the flames dimmed, darkness returned in full. The seated sleeper, half lit by embers, became part of the still life of the room, shadowed, resting, and only partly recumbent. And throughout it all, the sense of physical preparation mattered. The bed was readied each evening, the sheets adjusted, the covers folded back, the pillows set in place like a ritual. Even among the poor, there was rhythm and care. A tucked blanket, a fluffed sack of straw, a careful lean into rest. This physical world, the softness of the wool, the rough weave of homespun linen, the weight of the bolsters gave form to the practice of upright sleeping. It was a response not only to belief, but to the tangible constraints and comforts of daily life. And so, as we leave behind these textures of the night, let us now explore how literature and records words, both poetic and mundane, describe sleep itself. For sometimes, the written word reveals the most delicate insights into the habits we seek to understand. Let us now turn a quiet page and listen for the soft murmurs of voices, long gone echoes, preserved not in stone or wood, but in ink. In the poems, journals, and devotional texts of the Middle Ages, we find hints of how sleep was felt, feared, and framed. Though not always described directly, sleep lives between the lines, resting in metaphors, curled in verses, or standing watch in prayers whispered beneath moonlight. The medieval world was one of oral tradition, but literacy was growing, especially among clergy and the educated elite. What survives from the 1300s often comes from monasteries, courts, and guilds, and within these pages, sleep appears not only as a function of the body, but as a mirror to the soul. In the Book of the Night of the Tower, a guidebook written by a French nobleman for his daughters in the late 14th century, we find practical advice laced with moral instruction. Before bed, he writes, one should rehearse thy conscience, a kind of nightly accounting of the soul. This moment of reflection was best done, upright, still robed, seated at the bedside, eyes lowered in thought. To lie down before this ritual was seen as premature, even disrespectful. Thus, sleep began in posture, and uprightness was part of its moral frame. In poetry, too, sleep was depicted with reverence and formality. Chaucer's Book of the Duchess, written in the latter half of the 14th century, begins with the narrator lamenting his inability to sleep, his mind too troubled to rest. When he finally does drift off, it is in a half-seated dream state, beneath a couch of gold and azure blue, the positioning dreamlike, lofty, elevatidis, no coincidence. To sleep was to rise, not fall. Dreams, after all, were often thought to lift the soul closer to divine or distant realms. Devotional texts, such as the Ancrine Wissa, written earlier, but still widely copied and read during the 1300s, offer prescriptive advice for the solitary religious woman. These anchoresses, enclosed in cells beside churches, were instructed to sleep modestly, seated upright or with only slight recline, and never in a pose that suggested luxury or abandonment. Even in solitude, posture mattered. To sleep upright was to maintain decorum, humility, and spiritual readiness. Then there are the marginal notes, those fleeting glimpses into lived experience left in the edges of manuscripts. A scribe might note a prayer for a good rest, or a reminder to rise during the matins hour, deep in the night. Some notes speak of discomfort, poor bedding, or disturbed sleep. One even describes the night that crept too long, a poetic complaint that has echoed through centuries. Religious plays and morality tales sometimes use sleep as a symbol of moral decline. Characters who lay down completely were often portrayed as slothful or vulnerable to sin, while those who sat in watchful Nesivan in rest were praised for their spiritual vigilance. In these dramas, posture was not incidental, it was instructive, and among the lay population, folk songs occasionally reference sleep too. Though the melodies are lost, the lyrics remain. Verses about lovers who waited until first sleep passed before meeting in secret. Lullabies sung by mothers as they gently propped infants against their shoulder, or cautionary rhymes reminding listeners not to lie flat, lest the creeping cold find thee. Through all these words, solemn, poetic, fleeting, we sense a shared consciousness around sleep. It was not merely an intermission between days, but a meaningful ritual, woven with intention, and the body, seated and still, became an instrument tuned each night for rest, reflection, and reverence. As we leave the world of parchment and quill behind, our journey nears its end. But before we conclude, let us take one final step outward into the changing horizon of time and trace how this once common practice slowly faded away. Time, like sleep, moves quietly, gradually. Over the course of centuries, what was once ordinary becomes unusual. Habits shift, beliefs soften, and the firm traditions of one era dissolved gently into the next. So it was with the practice of sleeping upright. By the close of the 1300s, the upright posture remained common, but the world around it was beginning to change. The Renaissance loomed just ahead, bringing with it new ideas of science, anatomy, comfort, and selfhood. Medical theory too would evolve, and with these changes, the practice of sleeping seated so prevalent, so natural in its time, would slowly be forgotten. One of the early forces behind this shift was the transformation of medicine. As humoral theory lost ground to observational science in the 15th and 16th centuries, so too did many of its associated customs. The notion that sleeping upright aided digestion or kept vapors from pooling in the brain began to fade. Physicians began to recommend flat sleep for improved circulation, better rest, and skeletal alignment. Beds themselves were changing too. Innovations in carpentry and the growth of urban markets meant that more people, even among the middle classes, could afford well-made, horizontal bed frames. Feather beds and mattress ticking became more accessible, and the sheer comfort of lying flat began to outweigh older concerns about posture and propriety. Curtains gave way to bedrooms. Instead of a shared room with a curtained bed as the main refuge, sleeping quarters slowly became separate spaces, dedicated, private, and suited to more expansive rest. Where once privacy had been maintained by posture sitting upright to preserve modesty, now architecture served that role. Doors, chambers, and even separate wings in wealthier homes allowed people to lie down without social unease. The Reformation also played its part. As religious traditions were challenged, so too were the rituals that governed bodily conduct. Practices rooted in monastic discipline such as sleeping seated or refusing to lie flat were questioned or discarded. Protestant regions emphasized simplicity and practicality, and upright sleep became increasingly seen as a relic of monastic excess or outdated superstition. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the horizontal bed had become the standard. Portraits from the era show noblemen and women reclining luxuriously, draped across wide mattresses, often surrounded by silken sheets and polished wood. The upright sleeper had vanished, replaced by the lounger, the dreamer, the fully recumbent figure of modern rest. And yet, echoes of the past lingered. Some elderly people, even into the 19th century, continued to sleep in chairs or propped up in bed, not out of tradition, but because it helped with breathing. Upright sleeping endured in cases of illness, coughs, congestive ailments, or gastric trouble. In hospitals and infirmaries, raised beds remained common. Even today, in some corners of the world, upright sleeping lives on. Among night shift workers, spiritual communities, or those managing chronic conditions, the ancient practice still makes quiet appearances. Recliner chairs, adjustable beds, and certain sleep therapies all quietly echo a posture once widespread across Europe. And in historical reenactments, museum displays, and academic texts, we sometimes see it again. A bed angled just so, a pillow rising in gentle stages, a wax figure posed in stillness, sitting up, eyes closed, halfway between rest and awareness. It is easy to think of the past as primitive or strange, but in the upright sleeper of the 1300s, we see instead a person not so different from ourselves, seeking comfort, following wisdom, managing the body with the tools and knowledge they had. Their choices, shaped by their time, remind us that even the quietest customs have long and thoughtful roots. And so, we come to the end of our journey through shadowed chambers, monastic cells, and firelit cottages, all to understand a gesture so simple, so natural that we barely notice it today. Now, as we rest in the comforts of our own modern beds, flat and warm and private, let us gently turn toward reflection. Conclusion. Returning to the present. Here, in your room, the world is quieter. The air hums softly. Perhaps the sheets are cool, or the pillow beneath your head has just the right give. There is no rush to sleep, only a gentle drifting. And as you close your eyes, you may remember somewhere, in the dark centuries behind USA person not so unlike you. Someone sitting slightly upright, hands folded softly in the lap, breath steady, surrounded by silence. Their sleep was shaped by the wisdom of their time, just as yours is now shaped by yours. You may lie flat tonight, wrapped in layers of comfort and knowledge, but the story of the upright sleeper lingers calm, quiet, seated in the dark, a figure of rest, of rhythm, of history. So rest easy now. Let the past fade, and the present hold you. The night is long, and sleep, in whatever posture it finds you, is ready. Good night.